freaking look at that guy. His name is Rick. Hey, how's it going, Rick?
Good morning.
He's the producer of a short film called Ground Zero. He's the script supervisor of a feature film called Half and Half. He's the director of a short film that's coming out pretty soon that's pretty awesome, if I do say so myself, called Pit Stop. And he's also written feature films, short films, TV series, a whole bunch of nonsense. The thing I like about you is that I can pitch you in a story idea, and I'm kind of reminded of this last time we had our meeting, and you came up with ideas based on the sketches that people had outlined in their minds so freaking quickly. And the fact that you had 3 scripts written in like 2 days or 1.5 days was freaking shocking. And you had like story beats and character development and stuff like that in those short amount of time.
The great thing about that is, the actors knew what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spoke briefly about that, about being
so
in
have
a
your
box.
mic a little closer to you. Nice.
Like if you're in a box and you know what your boundaries are, then it's easier to paint a story within that box. So for like what we're creating, it's like, hey, there's going to be 2 actors in a 5, 6, 7 minute scene.
Yeah.
And one location. And so the more restrictions that I have, it's easier to create that story instead of, hey, the world is your palette, just go to town.
That's the beautiful thing of like indie filmmaking and the limitations that we sometimes kind of have to have, because we can't do anything. We can't make a dinosaur short film. We can't make a Jurassic Park 2. We have to make something that's sometimes very personal to us. We have to make an intimate story. We have to make a small scaled down story most of the time. And with that comes limitations. And
but that
box
also makes for a better story. I mean, let's be honest. You look at like the Fast and the Furious franchise, and I'm not digging on anything, how many billions of dollars it's
we
made.
we can do that for sure.
But again, even though Dom continues to say family, there's really not a whole lot of in-depth drama. There's not a whole lot of personal obstacles and challenges that need to be overcome.
Yeah.
Or, somebody learning about themselves or realizing they made mistakes and how do they deal with those regrets. And, some of the stuff that affects normal people on a day-to-day basis isn't captured in a Jurassic Park 2.
Yeah.
Because why? Well, because we're interested in selling CGI dinosaurs. So I can relate to a person who's going through problems. I can't relate to a dinosaur who's hungry.
Oh my gosh.
These short little arms. How are they supposed to?
I got a big head, little arms. You know Swiss Family Robinson? I got a big head, little arms.
Yeah. My son's got a T-shirt. Those little extendo grabber things?
Oh my gosh, I love that thing.
He's got a T-shirt. It's like, now I can rule the world. It's a Tyrannosaurus with those little grabby arms.
So you got experience in the Screenwriting Guild, obviously. What turns you off for stories? You've seen other scripts. What turns you off of stories?
I guess the first thought that comes to mind is being a social justice warrior, because it's so heavy-handed.
Oh, yeah.
Going into a story, it's like, well, I need to tell a story about racism or something.
Yeah.
And that's the whole foundation for the film.
For sure. And there are films that exist in that manner that are good. You can say Schindler's List, 12 Years a Slave, even Django Unchained, like in an entertainment aspect. Django Unchained deals with those like really heavy aspects, but it deals with them in like a very entertaining way. But you can definitely say in the last several years, there has been messaging, has been a big thing in films, more than the story. It's been about what the characters learn, and by extension, what the audience is supposed to learn. It's not really what the characters are experiencing, and that this feels like a real tangible element. No, it's what you're supposed to get. It's what you're supposed to learn. It's about how to be a better human being instead of a story. Do you think that's a problem with modern day studios and that message pushing?
Absolutely. Disney has gotten so much bounce back the last 6, 12, 18 months. Where they're purposely having to go woke on all of their projects, and the audiences just aren't having it. I mean, I haven't seen the movie, and I don't even know what the title of it is, but apparently in the last 6-8 weeks, there's been a big studio film from Disney, and it's an LGBT sort of film.
Yeah,
and I'm not judging. What I'm saying is that it's a smaller market. So how can you put $100 million or $200 million into a film when you're really only pandering to 10% of the audience?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like a Jurassic Park 2 will take audiences of every age, every gender, whatever it is, but you take a coming of age movie wrapped into that narrative or that agenda, and you've got a smaller audience.
Yeah.
It's not a positive or a negative thing. It's just a fact. You got a smaller audience.
Yeah, it's part of the message bringing in films, and again, it's not anymore part of the storytelling in films where this is a story you need to tell. Instead, you need to put your message into those films instead, which is kind of a shameful way to, I guess, to make your movie nowadays, which is to start with the message and go from there, instead of just have a story like, well, this is a really good concept, or this is a really good concept movie. Like, good concept movies revolve around, like, there's a guy in your house, but you don't know where he is. It's a good concept, and you can go from there and make a story around that, make characters around that. Where instead of, like you were saying before, I want to tell a story about racism. You can definitely do that. There are stories that do that all the time, but if the message is going to be the core center of the film, then arguably the story might suffer as a result, because the story is going to revolve around that message.
Well, and see, that's the thing too, is like, are you writing this story? Are you telling this message to show how the characters develop, grow, change, have regrets, whatever? Or are you telling it to directly change the viewpoint of your audience?
Yeah.
I mean, some audiences are pretty keen to that messaging, and others aren't. So the idea that, you can tell a story where your characters are going through some self-identity crisis or some such, and it's perfectly digestible by an audience.
Yeah.
But if your purpose for telling the story is to condemn your audience, or to educate your audience, or to try to teach them or twist them into believing certain things, that's a very different feel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's no nuance to it. Like, there can only be one perspective that's right, and everything else is wrong. Whereas you're dealing with a world with everyone who disagrees with one another. There can be different ideologies going back and forth, and generally speaking, if you're going to create a movie that's dealing with those kind of ideologies, you have to understand that you're going to alienate one type if you're going to just pursue one aspect. It's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but you are alienating one type instead of producing a film that's objectively looking at it from a realistic standpoint and viewing these ideologies in the realistic scenario where they've been presented to us in reality. I would ask, if there was one studio that you could take over, what studio would that be? What would you change, and how would you change it for the better?
I've thought about this. And my first thought would be like a Disney.
Yeah.
Because you've got all audiences looking to Disney, whether this is an animated for children, or whether it's like a Marvel or a Star Wars for adults. So something like that would have such a huge outreach, such a huge, to go look at, okay, well, what does Universal have as their intellectual property, or what does, Columbia have, or what does Sony have? What is their intellectual property rights? So like me personally, okay, so to answer your question, I guess it would be Disney, or just build our own studio. Start from, because all of them started from day one.
Yeah.
Now we're living in a world where these are legacy creations that have lasted for decades and decades, but all of them at some point had a start at day one.
For sure.
And so that's what I would prefer. I would prefer to start at day one. So as far as going back and changing things, you can't do that. That's like saying, well, if a genie showed up and you had 3 wishes, what would those 3 wishes be? It's like, okay, number one, there are no genies, there are no 3 wishes. Why am I going to waste my time on these what if scenarios when I can take that same effort and actually put it into something that has a path to go down?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
So like what we're working on right now would aim towards the adults. Mm-hmm. But I am 100% behind, all right, well, let's create something that aims to a young adult audience, or a child audience,
I mean, we're definitely in the independent areas where we're creating films because we want to, because we have the passion for it, and that's not from the studio. Like, I mean, think of I use Star Wars a lot as an example, but it's just such a really good example. For Star Wars, George Lucas, that was an original property at one point in time, but it became from like the passion in his heart to make this kinds of story. Even the prequels had that kind of thing. It was George Lucas' passion to get these things on the big screen, and that's where it originated from the beginning. And as of recent, because of a lot of the way Marvel has been produced, because of some of the things that DC has been produced, everything has been very monetizable. And that's the same thing with Star Wars. Star Wars has been an attempt to be monetizable the same way Marvel has, the same way DC has, instead of understanding that where these things originally came from was a passion of storytelling, passion of these characters, passion of how Darth Vader works off of Luke Skywalker and all of these individual stories in a galaxy far, far away, for the sword fighting, for the action, for the space battles, all these things that all of us grew up on, that we all love. We all love playing with the toys and stuff, and the Darth Vader action figures. But I don't see the same thing happening for the newer Star Wars films, because they feel very factory-based, if that makes sense. And what we're doing is kind of very based on passion. Not that we're doing everything correctly, but it's passion-based.
They've worked out the algorithm. Korn has a song, and the music video is all about drawing attention to the industry, the music video industry.
Yeah.
Like 95% of all hit songs have to have this within the first 30 seconds, or they have to have this within the first 45 seconds, you know? And so they've worked out, these big studios they've worked out the algorithm. It's like, I know exactly what I need. I need a character that hits this and a character that hits this, and this is what they're struggling with. And by this page number, this has to come into play. And so it's very formulaic. Now, if I was 20 years younger, I maybe wouldn't have that algorithm sorted out, because, you know, I've only watched 500 movies instead of 5,000 movies, or whatever the case is, you know? And so I get that, but yeah, so they've worked out a formula, and they know the formula works. And so why would they ever deviate from the formula? You know, but the thing is, we live in a time, I mean, think of like TikTok, at how much of an influence, you know, people sit around, or like Instagram or whatever, and they'll just flip their thumb and they just spend hours looking at TikTok video this, or an Instagram video this,
kangaroo video, pug video.
And so they'll spend hours on 10-second or 30-second input. And so we've really changed the audience. So you can spend $250 million on Jurassic Park 15, but I don't think you're going to capture the same audience today that you would have captured 25 years ago.
No, it's not.
Fewer people are going to go sit in AMC and watch it on the big screen because, oh, well, I've got other things to do, or my attention span just isn't there.
Yeah.
We've been dumbed down. We've been programmed to only accept input in 30-second chunks.
Yeah, the audience isn't there anymore. The audience for these older projects, for these older movies, aren't there anymore. And I think that's why a lot of people like Top Gun, because it felt like the original one. I think a lot of people are turned off from Star Wars now because it doesn't feel like Star Wars anymore. This isn't the Star Wars we grew up with. This is something new. Whether that's new for a good or bad, it ultimately is up to the viewer, but it's definitely new. It's definitely not the same as the older Star Wars, and that's not the same audience.
I'm really interested to see what happens with this new Avatar movie when it comes out. I mean,
I have no idea what's going to happen with this.
Is he going to make his money back?
It has to be the third highest grossing movie of all time
just to break even.
Yeah. That's stupid.
I don't know. We live in
Why
a
would you
different
make
world.
a movie with the understanding that you have to be, that was lightning in a bottle the first time they did it? And no one has talked about that movie ever since. It's not been brought up in like film conversations. It's generally speaking kind of been forgotten, other than the fact that it has blue people, which brings in the anime crowd of weirdos. And then I like the movie fine. It's all right. It's not great. It's passable. It's got good special effects, but I don't know what the cultural draw is going to be with this movie. I'm so interested. I'm more interested in the box office results of this movie than I am of the actual movie itself, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I don't know what to predict.
I think it's going to flop. I feel like it's going to flop. I feel like it can't be the third
Even
highest
if it
grossing movie of all
makes
time.
$400 million, it'll still be considered a flop.
Yeah.
Because of it's been in 12 years now.
Oh my gosh.
How many years has it
I
been?
have no idea how they think this is going to be a success. There's not a draw. I mean, I guess isn't there a theme park in Universal with Pandora in it or something?
I'm sure there is.
Oh, yeah. But that was only to draw in, because I feel like they knew that this was like, there's not a real hype for this movie. There's not a real hype for when Endgame was building up in theaters. There was a hype for that movie. And when
they had a year. They did Infinity War, and okay, we're just going to let half of your heroes disappear.
Yeah.
And then you got to sit on it for a year. And
It's
everyone's
brilliant.
like, I hated that. Well, my wife especially is like, I hate it. I thought they were going to win, you know. But I got the director's cut edition of it, you know. And so you could sit around, you could listen to the Russos talk about the whole purpose of Infinity War was to let the audience think that Thor had a chance of killing Thanos.
Yeah.
Build up to that, build up to that, build up to that. And then he fails. You know, and that's something else that, you know, when you listen to or read articles about the difference between America cinema versus like European cinema.
Yeah.
You look at French films or you look at, they're okay to let your hero fail. They're okay to not have a happy ending. It's America that really needs the happy ending. And so Infinity War came along and they're like, wait a minute, there's no happy ending? But like you said, there was enough lead up before Endgame. Because like everyone's got a year like, how are we going to fix this?
Yeah.
So
and it's also Marvel, and I think at that point they knew that with these last two movies in this saga of films, even though they're going to continue afterwards, they knew they could probably pull that card and still get that audience, especially leave them with that cliffhanger of all of this epic build-up, all of this epic meaning of characters that we got to see in this movie. All of it was for a defeat. How are they going to continue that? And that was the question going forward. And so I think Infinity War is probably their Marvel's best movie because of that. Because it decides to deviate from the formula and take somewhat of a risk. Some would say it's not a risk, but it kind of is a risk to kill off that many characters and have that downer of an ending. Because you could say that Empire Strikes Back, the hero is defeated. Sort of, kind of. But Darth Vader doesn't get what he wants. The Empire doesn't necessarily get what he wants. They don't get Luke Skywalker. And the Rebels are still building up their fleet at the end. They're going after him. So there's still somewhat of... There's a humongous amount of hope at the end of Empire Strikes Back, even though they're technically defeated. With Infinity War, half the universe is dead.
How do you fix this?
Half the heroes are dead. Yeah. And Thanos is like, the last shot we see is Thanos smiling. He wins. He won. That's a great ending. That's a what the frick ending. I remember seeing them the first time in theaters, and the theater was silent. And like, oh my gosh. Like, and when everyone was disappearing, and like when Black Panther disappeared, when Groot disappeared, when all these people disappeared, I was like, what? Who? And you were nervous, and Peter disappeared, and Spider-Man disappeared, and he's like, Mr. Stark, no. Like,
it was.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
it was very emotional.
It was effective.
They did a great job.
In fact, I don't think a Marvel film has been that effective up until that point, or really since. So it's Infinity.
I don't know how they think they're gonna duplicate.
They can't. It's impossible. It's impossible.
I mean, I read stuff like over a year or two ago about, okay, well, the next big enemy instead of Thanos is going to be like Galactus. And so we have to basically start over like they did with Iron Man or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're going to paint these people and we're going to let them go on their own little journeys. And then we're going to bring in the bad guy just a little bit here and a little bit there. And so it's going to take a decade to build up to this. I guess I'm not seeing that yet.
Nope.
I mean, I've seen... gosh, I can't remember the name of it. The guy with the rings, the 5 rings or whatever it was.
Man. Shang-Chi, guy.
Shang-Chi, yep. I've seen that, and I saw the new Doctor Strange, which was a little bit dark. I took my kids there, and so my 11-year-old, my 10-year-old, my 8-year-old...
Got to see Wanda go crazy.
There's like a cloak made of like demon skeletons. I'm like, I don't know that my 8-year-old really needs to. Oh, look, it's an animated dead Strange. Spoiler alerts, you know. But it was a little darker. Now, and I get it. Everyone says that, oh, well, the Doctor Strange comics were always very dark. Blah, blah. But my 8-year-old isn't coming from, hey, I read the Doctor Strange comics 20 years ago or whatever it was. Yeah. It's like, no. They're going for this experience, and it was really dark for them.
It was. I mean, for a Marvel movie, it's very dark. I don't know if for a normal movie, it's going to be super, super dark because Marvel can never go further into the genre than it's limited to. That's why I don't like Winter Soldier as much as most people do, because that movie is definitely like a Bourne-style spy genre, but it can never go as far into that genre as it could have if it wasn't a Marvel movie, because it has that Marvel third act, it has that Marvel superpowerness.
But it doesn't need it.
It doesn't.
each film has its own little genre within itself.
Yeah.
But it didn't need to go darker than that for Winter Soldier. Now, we're talking about comic book movies, and why I don't know, but like DC, because I thought about it when you mentioned like what movie studio would you take over, you know? And I look at like, is it Warner Brothers who owns all the DC stuff now?
Yeah, Warner Brothers owns all the DC stuff now. I mean, to be honest with you, like, I think it'd be fun to take over Blumhouse. Because Blumhouse could be another A24 studio for horror films.
But the thing is, why would you take it over? Why don't you just create your own?
Well, I know. In this instance, I'm just taking over. I would love to create my own stuff. But
I mean,
in this instance, I'm taking over.
So what it was, Invisible Woman, instead of a $5 million budget, they gave him a $7 million budget. That's still a huge number. I mean, the projects that we're working on now
have no budget.
Right, but they're incredibly enjoyable.
Yeah.
So much better than flipping through TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that, we need 6 or 7 figures in order to make something enjoyable for an audience is absolute garbage.
Mm-hmm.
That's just propaganda.
Part of that is the inflation of film budgets is recent. As of, I'm not sure, I think it was like 2012, but the more you spend on a project, the more your investment is going to be returned. Because that's going to be, that's including like the investment in actors, especially Robert Downey Jr. If you have him on a project, most of your money is going to him, and like everything that's going to the marketing, the special effects, everything. The more you spend, the more your return on investment is going to be. Generally speaking, that's what the bigger budget Hollywood. But that doesn't make sense for most movies.
Okay, so that's raw numbers.
Yes, that's raw numbers.
I want to talk about percentages. Mm-hmm. If you take $50,000 to build a feature, mm-hmm. and you only get back $500,000.
Yeah.
Because you go to all little Alamo draft houses and you do 4 walls in like 7 or 8 or 9 theaters here, and then you do 7 or 8 or 9 theaters somewhere else, and you win a few contests or whatnot. You've multiplied your investment by 10.
True. But you're not.
Nobody is going to spend $300 million on Jurassic Park 12 and get back 10 times the return.
Yes. But you haven't considered the fact the marketing costs in that and getting people to come to that. You can consider social media, that's one thing, but getting people to come to your movie in Alamo Drafthouse or any of those other studios, that's completely different subject matter. And that's why a lot of movies as of recent have had so much trouble getting their money back, especially when they went to that COVID time. You know, Bond, the budget for that movie went up so much because they had to double their marketing costs because they had a marketing campaign around COVID, and then COVID shut down, that scrapped their marketing budget, and then they had to redo their marketing budget when COVID was done, and they had to redo it like twice. I don't know why they had to keep canceling it. And it inflated the budget so much.
I think there's smarter ways to do this. Did you ever see the movie Upgrade?
Yes. I love that movie.
Same guy who did Invisible Woman, right?
Yeah,
He's out
same
of
guy.
New Zealand or whatnot. I can't remember his name. But so the only advertisements that I ever saw for Upgrade was on YouTube, right? Well, now YouTube has all these advertisements that are like 7 seconds. So you can't even skip over them. So it takes a little bit of ingenuity. But we could make a 30-second trailer or an 8-second trailer.
Yeah.
You know, so
that's true.
You slip into these, if you're on Instagram or something, you know, the just tiny little ads like, ooh, here's some whiskey poured in a glass.
Yes.
That's it. That's all it took. So I feel with some ingenuity, a guy doesn't need to spend millions on a marketing budget in order to get the message to your audience.
100%. It's part of why the reason TV series are so accessible nowadays. You can spend that money on marketing, and it's enticing more to people because they don't have to go out, plan their evening, plan around everything. They can turn on their TV, turn on HBO, turn on Netflix, turn on whatever streaming service they have, and start the freaking story from the comfort of their own home. And again, that's something that COVID introduced to us. Watch your crap at your house. Be comfortable. You don't have to have this crying, disastrous child that this dumb mom bring in and just she's crying the entire time and not bringing it out, and you don't want to commit a crime but you're considering it, and it's a whole thing. They brought in a certain amount of comfort to those things, and TV series have definitely blossomed because of it. Not that they weren't bad before, but they definitely have rose in popularity.
See, personally, I still like the feature film approach.
And I'm not downing that at all.
I say that because I can invest an hour and a half, 2 hours to watch a feature film. But I'll be brutally honest. I have not invested the required hours to watch like Winter Soldier and Falcon.
Yeah.
Or WandaVision, or there's a Hawkeye one. It's like I can't dedicate myself to watch 8 episodes or 10 episodes or 12 episodes. It's like I don't have 9 hours to put in this. I'll give you an hour and a half, and if I love it, I'll watch a sequel, but I don't have time is so valuable. It's priceless. You can never get it back. It is.
Again, with COVID, with the pandemic and everything, it has given rise to the stay-at-home experience. But again, not down in the feature film aspect. I do love movies, and I do love...
You love movies?
Kind of. That's why I have this freaking podcast. What's your opinion on schlock movies? What's the value of schlock movies?
There's a place for them.
Yes.
I mean, we mentioned briefly, like, Monty Python, and it's not for everyone.
No.
It is absolutely not for everyone.
I don't like Napoleon Dynamite.
I've seen it once. And yeah, I don't recall laughing that much, because it's painful to watch people be this stupid. No, it is. It is. Now, okay, so The Office. The first season, I wasn't impressed.
Yeah.
But seasons 2 through the end were phenomenal. So I guess that says that I do appreciate some kind of corny, stupid humor as well, right? But I agree on the Napoleon Dynamite. But you talk about schlock, and I mentioned Monty Python, or even like a Princess Bride. And I'm not saying Princess Bride is schlock. I'm saying it's kind of cheesy and corny.
That's classy schlock.
Do you know what I mean? Or like a Mel Brooks.
Let me clarify what I mean by schlock. I mean
the Sharknado movies.
I'm talking about Sharknado. I'm talking about the masterpiece of a trailer that came out that has my full freaking attention the entire time. Cocaine Bear. Oh my gosh, I want to be there opening night. I want to see that more than I want to see any Marvel movie ever. That looks amazing. It looks terrible, and I want to see every second of it. It's also kind of like Silent Night, Deadly Night, or what was the movie that came out with David Harbour as Santa Claus where he's killing people?
That was real recent.
Oh, freaking. Those movies make me happy because those movies know what they are. They know they're dumb, and they can get away with it. I don't think Sharknado is a good example, to be honest with you, because I think there's too much bad quality when it comes to that. You could say that that's part of the schlock, but I think it bogs the movie down. I think a good schlock movie will embrace its premise, embrace its stupidity, and the characters are aware of the stupidity.
And I think in order to back up what you're talking about, I think there's a place for that, especially with newer filmmakers. Because if you understand your limitations and you show up with coconuts instead of horses, then that's part of the shtick. That's part of the schlock. Mm-hmm. And so you're capitalizing on your lack of resources. When they were going to burn the witch and the guy's got, if a witch weighs the same as a duck and he's got shaving cream all over his face, they purposely embrace the schlock. Mm-hmm. So I think like no budget or low budget type films, if they know what they're doing, can absolutely capitalize that.
Yeah, you can even say the original Evil Dead is a schlock movie. I think it is a schlock movie.
Sure, but it got a great audience, and that audience carried them through all the way to Army of Darkness and beyond.
Yeah, they capitalized on every limitation that they have. That's working with your limitations to the nth degree. It's understanding that maybe not everything that you have is super realistic, so let's make it over the top. Let's make it go crazy. Let's go crazy with everything. Everything is an over-the-top reaction.
Well, and that's a big thing, too, and I brought this up before, where when I was learning Russian, when you're speaking in a foreign language, you don't say what you want to say, because you're going to fail. You don't have the vocab, you don't have the idiosyncrasies of the language, so you say what you can say.
Yeah. And
so when you're talking about schlock or talking about low budget or no budget, make your movie what you can make your movie, not what you want to make your movie. Well, I want to make Jurassic Park 12. Okay, well, you don't have the budget, you don't have the special effects, and you don't have the actors. So what can you make? You can make Velocipaster. That's what you can make.
You can 100% work with it. I think my biggest pet peeve, and it's partially because I was this type of filmmaker, the filmmaker that takes himself way too seriously, the filmmaker that wants to be the next Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker that sees his films as work of art instead of pieces of entertainment. Because to be honest with you, that's what most filmmakers want to achieve at the end of the day is an entertaining piece and something that captivates an audience in one way, shape, or another, whether it is to get a reaction or was to get applause, some kind of reaction they want from the audience. And I don't believe the people that say, like, I don't care what people say about my artwork, I just want to create art. No, you don't. You want a reaction from somebody at the end of the day.
Right. If nobody sees it, what's the purpose of making it?
Exactly.
So there's that. But at the same point, I will argue when you're talking about, the next Stanley Kubrick or whatnot, it's like you can never be that. So
No, you can't.
you need to be you. Now you can take influences from those things. Even Quentin Tarantino talks about how he's paying homage to all of these different films.
That's his thing. That's all he. That's not all he does. I love Quentin Tarantino, but it's not. He steals a lot. He steals a lot. He says he steals a lot.
And you know what? His audiences don't give a shit.
Not
They
at all.
love his films, and they will stand in line for hours to get a ticket to go see it.
100%.
So, and there's nothing new under the sun. So the idea that, well, I'm going to come up with some original idea that's never been done before, well, good luck. Mm-hmm. Or just be you and find something that you enjoy and that you can do well and that's something that you can get better at and be the best you that you can be.
Yeah.
And congratulations. God blessed it. There you go.
Truly. And be realistic with yourself. Don't go out being a director if you don't really have a real passion for being a director. Maybe sometime on the line that you want something changes in your mind. You want to be an actor. You want to be a cinematographer. You want to do those kinds of things. Don't go out. There's this funny little clip. I think I mentioned this quite a few times before. There's this funny little clip, meme online, where there's this announcer and a bunch of filmmakers are right next to him. And he tells all these filmmakers, who wants to be a director? And all of them raise their hand. Who wants to be the gaffer? One person in the back raises their hand. Don't strive to be the next Stanley Kubrick. Don't strive to be the best. Strive to know what you're good at. Strive for your passion. And be realistic with what you want in your passion. Because if you're not, you're forcing yourself into a creative rut where you're going to end up being angry with yourself for not choosing this one career path over another, if that makes sense.
And honestly, there are a lot of writers that will go to like an actor's boot camp sort of school in order to know what the actors go through or what they're striving for, or in order for them to be able to relate with actors that they have on their set. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Maybe you don't ever want to be an actor, but you still want to know what they go with or what they go through.
Dude, I from the amount of people that I've worked with in the past few years, I've figured out a lot about and this is coming from a non-actor. I'm not an actor, but I've discovered a lot about acting that has really informed me on the process of being an actor and how impressive it really is to be good at it. Not to just be an actor, but to be good at it. Like, I talked with Mark a lot, who's been on the podcast a few times. I talked with Amber a lot, who's been on the podcast. Both of them have stressed the importance of becoming the character and living within the character's space. And that's not a really easy task to put yourself in that aspect, or at least it seems pretty simple, like just pretend like you're this character. Not necessarily. You have to live as that character for a second. You have to live in the same space as that character for a second. And then you have to play out the scene with that. And then even when you're on a film set, it's different than a stage set. You have to live as that character, but you also have to wait in between takes while the gaffer and the cinematographer set up the next shot and the director talks to you about these things, and then you have to get back into the character space when the director calls action. You have to live within these small moments of being that character instead of on stage where you're as the character for hours and hours and hours. So it's a different process.
It's a very different dynamic. I remember reading an article a few years ago where Shiloh LaBeouf,
LaBeouf,
he was on part of a movie where I guess he didn't shower for like 4 months.
Freaking.
In order to really get in character. Now, I think there's an overboard there, but I mean, maybe he sold the role. I don't know. But
it's going to get a reaction for sure.
Now, I understand that Half and Half doesn't have any dialogue. So trying to compare what Daniel Day-Lewis goes through and like what Johnny went through for Half and Half, but nobody can watch Half and Half and be concerned that, oh well, Johnny isn't really homeless.
Yeah.
Or he's not really this character. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
So I think that's a little overboard. Actually becoming this fake person for, weeks of filming or whatnot.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think it's necessary, but you know what? Whatever floats your
Yeah.
boat. That's their problem, not my problem.
For sure. I mean, I want to. It's a double-edged sword because I think Daniel Day-Lewis is an absolutely brilliant actor. And again, I've talked about not seeing the actor in roles. When I see Leonardo DiCaprio in movies, I see Leonardo DiCaprio. That is to say, for an exception of a few movies, I'd say Django Unchained is a good example.
Sure.
I think I see more the villain role than I see Django. Or I mean the character Calvin Candy. That's when I see a Daniel Day-Lewis movie, I don't see Daniel Day-Lewis, I see the character he's portraying.
Well, that's a valid argument. Folks will diss people like Dwayne Johnson or Kevin Costner, how they're always the same, or even like a Ryan Reynolds, I suppose. They're always the same person.
Yeah.
They're just playing a different role, but it's always him. You don't remember the character's name. You just remember that, who it was as the actor.
For sure.
But honestly, I think that works. I think it's okay.
It's
because
not bad.
we're all people. We're all real people living our real lives.
Yeah.
And honestly, in my filmmaking and my storytelling, I like to take the actor as them in this extraordinary role, instead of creating an extraordinary character. And I mean, what immediately comes to mind is like the show Monk.
Yeah.
Where he's like really OCD and very typical about, not touching germs and all these sorts of things. Instead of taking somebody that nobody can relate to, take an actor that everybody can relate to.
Yeah.
And put them in an extraordinary situation. Because everybody can relate to that. At some point in our lives, we come across an extraordinary situation. But you're just a normal person.
For sure.
And you have to deal with this. But you know what? It all works. I mean, look at Marvel. None of those people are normal-ass people.
No, not at all.
So there's an argument for both sides of the fence. But for me personally, instead of creating a character that is blind and deaf, and I'm going to make it entertaining for the whole audience for 2 hours. It's like, no, I'm going to take a normal person who has normal problems and normal obstacles, but I'm going to put them in an extraordinary situation so the audience can kind of put themselves into that. Like, what would I do in this situation?
Yeah.
Instead of, now again, this is just for me. Instead of trying to create a character that is larger than life, you take a normal operating individual and put them into a scenario that's larger than life. And I think that would be easier for when you're talking about the indie scene. I think that's maybe easier isn't the right word, but I think it's more fitting for those actors instead of asking someone who's just still learning their craft to act as some outlandish character. To be more grounded.
Because the big blockbusters, you get the action, you get the special effects, you get all of that stuff. But the
and
personalities of the indie films are
like
something
I went
else.
to the new Jurassic Park Dominion or whatnot. I had
you wasted your time too. Cool.
I had such high hopes. I'm like, wow, now we get to see what happens when dinosaurs have taken over the world.
You get to see bugs. You get to see bugs.
I was so disappointed. I left and I'm like, why did I do this? I would rather just go to sleep with my high hopes instead of having them dashed upon the rocks.
That's what I feel like in the last two Star Wars movies. I'm not going to say that for the Force Awakens. I actually had a great time with Force Awakens. I did not have a good time in the last two movies. I actually said nope. In the last Star Wars movie,
Is it the last one or the time before that where they
The Rise of Skywalker? No, The Last Jedi, I actually convinced myself for a while that I actually liked the movie. And then over time, I kind of had to be truthful with myself and like, that wasn't good. That wasn't good.
Everybody bashed it. Was it also, did Ryan Jackson
Ryan Jackson? Ryan
No,
Johnson?
Johnson. Did he do the one where Luke Skywalker like gave up? He's like, yeah.
That was the one. Rise of
I don't
Skywalker.
do any of that shit anymore.
Rise of
It's like,
Skywalker was the one that Ryan Johnson done.
everybody bashed that. And now there were commentators that came back and was like trying to justify. It's like, well, trying to make sense of it and make it more acceptable.
Man, dude, the only real defense for that is that it was different and that it was something that we didn't expect. That's the only defense that we have for that, because as a character, it doesn't make any sense for Luke Skywalker to ever do that.
The problem is you paint a picture and you have to show the audience that picture.
Yes.
You want to tell a story, you have to give the audience what they want.
Yes.
You don't do Jurassic Park 12 and not show them any dinosaurs because you want to be different. No, you have to, you don't do a boxing movie where at the end they decide not to box and they shake hands and everybody goes home. Hey, congratulations, you're done with poverty now.
Yeah.
No. This is a boxing movie.
We're done.
Somebody has to punch somebody. That's
For
why
sure.
I paid the ticket. So I get exactly what you're saying.
It's the problem with expectations in movies, and that the studios are so very well aware what the audience thinks of movies that they're almost trying to go against the grain so that there's some kind of expectation
Controversy
subversion,
or something to talk about or something.
Exactly. And because
and so that goes right back to my argument about it shouldn't be about dollars.
No.
It should be about percentage of return. I mean, if you can spend $5,000 to make a film and you get back 50 through advertising and through paid ticket sales and through future opportunities, and that's a 10 return.
Yeah.
You're never going to spend $300 million on a Jurassic and get back $3 billion.
Yeah. I've watched Game of Thrones all the way through. And what it does better than most stories is story subversion of expectations. But the thing that does well...
All of this subversion of expectations is negative. It's like, oh, he's my hero. Yeah, well, he's dead.
Yeah.
Oh, I love what he did. Yeah, well, he's dead too. It's like, oh.
It is, but it's also in service of the story. And so many people nowadays want to do that same thing. They want to have that subversion expectations from the audience because they know they all are aware of the audience's expectations of their movies and they want to go in a different direction. But the problem is that always goes for shock value, not story. Game of Thrones, that always went for story. Spoiler for Game of Thrones in 3, 2, 1, when Ned Stark dies in the first season, it advances the story of his son, of the war on Westeros, on everything that happens with King's Landing and the Lannisters versus the Starks and everything like that. It advances the story instead of stops it in his tracks or goes against what the characters were doing. Nothing went against Ned Stark's character when he was killed. He was killed for betrayal reasons, but he was never killed for stupid reasons. When Luke Skywalker goes against his character in The Last Jedi, he goes against his character because the writer said, I'm going to go against this character just because it's something different. It's something different than what the audience's expectations was, instead of this is something that the actual character would come to the logical conclusion of. There's no way, in any way, shape, or form, that I can see the Luke Skywalker that George Lucas gave us ever coming to this conclusion. This is simply a fan fiction story that someone wrote to put Luke Skywalker at the very end of his rope. And that's what I see the sequels as. I see them as fan fiction now. What frustrates you and or makes you excited about filmmaking? One after the other. Doesn't have to be both at once.
What makes me excited is being able to tell a story. I mean, everything that I experience in life, I only get it from my point of view. And so being able to take those things that mean a lot to me and encapsulate them into a digestible nugget of truth, of my truth, and understanding that a lot of the audience has the same truth, trying to figure out heads or tails of what this life is all about. Being able to take those struggles, not even from me, but from the actors and from the story, and putting that into a format where I can affect the audience. Because if there was no audience, then would there be any film? I guess that's a question about a chicken or an egg or a tree falling in the forest. Mm-hmm. So really you're not, me, I'm not making the film for me. I'm making the film for others.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an incredible opportunity to be able to share things that mean a lot to me with a larger audience.
I guess kind of a side note, what is a movie that talks to you in that aspect? Because you say you have your own personal demons, you have your own struggles, you have your own things that stand out to you with characters and movies and stuff like that. Like for example, for me, Hell or High Water is a great example of a movie that speaks to me as a personal figure, because that movie has the Texas feel. I love Texas. I love the feel of Texas. I love the openness of Texas, the open plains of Texas, and that movie has the open Texas feel. And just I pursue feelings in those movies, or the feel of those movies sometimes, rather than the story itself. And that movie gives me that. So, is there a movie that stands out to you as maybe not necessarily the best movie of all time, but like a personal feel that you get either based on nostalgia, or like that character stands out to me because that character might be resembling me in a way?
That's an impossible question to answer. I would love to give you an answer. But I don't know that I have one off the top of my head.
Do you have any movies that you would consider like the best of like the 2000s era, the 2010s eras, or like just in general?
Oh, golly. These are impossible questions.
No, they're not. You got an opinion somewhere in there.
I have an opinion somewhere in there. Oh, gosh.
Even going back to a Quentin Tarantino example, I love nostalgia-based movies because I feel like, in my own personal opinion, that really speaks to me, because I love nostalgia for certain things, not all things. But that movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is a movie that speaks to Quentin Tarantino on a nostalgic level, and you can tell based on how he made that movie. It's a very nostalgic movie, but only for Quentin Tarantino. And I can feel the passion residing from that movie because he has such a love of that time period. And the fact that the cars in that movie and just driving down the road is introduced to you as just a scene in and of itself. There's no talking of the scene. It's just listening to the radio, driving down the road as fast as humanly possible. I love those scenes. I absolutely love those scenes because they speak like... I mean, I've had nights where I've just been angry, frustrated, sad, or whatever, and I've just drove down the road for as long as humanly possible. I've talked to God, I've listened to the radio, I've talked to myself, I've just ranted or whatever on the road. I've had those moments of just driving down the road, and it's been I'm not a therapy person, I don't struggle with depression or anything, but that's my own personal therapy, just driving down the freaking road at however fast you can, because you're in Texas and we don't give a crap about the speed limit, and we're listening to the radio and thinking about our own thoughts and stuff like that. Cool, all right.
No, I'm racking my brain over like what movies I've seen in the last handful of years that really spoke to me. I mean, because you talk about how Once Upon a Time in Hollywood meant something to Tarantino, but he had to create that.
He did.
So let me make 2, 3, 4 features, and I'll tell you which one meant the most to me. Come ask me this question in a couple years.
Okay. I like there's a Ron Howard effect to this, where he had a master class a while back, and I think Ron Howard is he seems like an incredibly sweet person, and he seems like he has a really diverse filmography. I mean, he directed a movie about Moby Dick, and then he also directed The Grinch with Jim Carrey. It's such a very diverse filmography, but he says like every film that you're involved in somehow, one way or another, works your way into your heart in one way. And I've had films where I've had bad experience on. I've had films where I've had really good experiences on. And every single one has molded its way into my heart in one way or another. It holds a special place in my heart. Well, I mean, what are your own personal favorites? What are the movies that could you watch over and over again?
Oh, the movies I watch over and over. I can always watch Princess Bride. I can always watch Monty Python, The Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I can watch Avatar over and over because I can appreciate it for what it is. And I'm not even, I mean, of course, you know, people run to the defense of, well, it was the number one moneymaker for like a decade, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, really at a personal level, you know, you look at Sigourney Weaver's character and the challenges that she faces and how she's ridiculed by everybody outside of the scientific sphere, but within the scientific sphere, she's kind of the queen.
Yeah.
And you look at your main character who was never supposed to be there anyway. It just so happens he's there because he's the twin, you know, I mean, so the creation of the scenario as well as the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a fluke that it was so financially successful because it's a good story. You know, and I get it that it's a mirror of you know, of this is the hero's greatest journey, you know, the hero's journey.
It's a familiar
and
story, but that doesn't make it bad.
Exactly. You know, and the audience loves familiarity. And that's why we talk about having to stick to your genre. You can't, it's difficult to get a cult following of an audience if you mash the wrong genres.
Yep.
Now they've done this. Like there was a zombie musical that came out 2.5 years ago.
Yes, there was.
And
yeah.
it was fine for what it was, but you could never be scared because they're singing songs.
No.
But you could never enjoy singing the songs because there's also intestines and blood everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, so I for artistically, I'm sure it was a great success. But as far as monetarily, and I hate that money is an issue. I really do. I hate that money is an issue, but it's part of the equation because that's what allows you to make your next film.
But it could also be like the mixed genres and what works, because Shaun of the Dead was very popular. It made its money back 100%.
Sure.
But maybe the musical and the zombie was not the right genre to mix. Comedy and zombies tends to mix very well.
Well, yes, and it comes down to the characters. Take a stand-up comedian and put him into the apocalypse scenario with zombies.
I want to see a Dave Chappelle in fighting zombies.
Well, sure, you know, or anything like that. And so, you know, within the characters, you can mesh genres. Absolutely.
Can you imagine like Dave Chappelle, Bill Burr, and like Tom Segura with like machine guns or something, like facing down the apocalypse in like
what
Los Angeles?
What comes to mind is Tropic Thunder, where you got
oh my gosh,
you know. So,
oh my gosh,
so yeah, there are many examples of successful genre meshing.
Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Yep, Tucker and Dale.
I love that movie so much. That's a great mix of genres.
I showed it to my family, and they all thought I was crazy.
It's a great movie. It's a freaking great movie. It's also a good love story. It's kind of a good love story at the end of the day.
Well, that's what Deadpool 2 is. It's a love story.
Yeah, sure,
know?
It's a love story. But like in midway through, like just kidding, it's a horror movie. But like, yeah, that's why the first Deadpool is awesome and the second one's not that great.
My personal opinion is I like the second one better than the first one because
you're
the
just
first
wrong.
The first one has a little more darker undertones. They're trying to torture him in order to activate the special genes and all these sorts of things. The second one, we already know that you can't take any of it seriously, and so you can really capitalize on breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah,
so I like the second one better than the first one.
I think that disrupts the comedy more. I think that gels well with the comedy more because there are even scenes in Tucker and Dale versus Evil that you can take seriously. Even in Shaun of the Dead, you can take seriously. And that makes the comedy scenes even funnier to me because you can have a juxtaposition between legitimate horror and then some funny moments. I got nothing else to talk about.
Did we hit all 4 of your questions?
We hit them brutally. We actually committed a felony midway through.
Finish our project, and then you can have me back.
Hey, Ernesto, roll those credits, my dude.